Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. Hello, I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our weekly Kaffeepause. Today, we're joined by Anja Wehler-Schöck. She is based in Berlin, where she serves as the international editor at the German daily Der Tagesspiegel. Anja, herzlich willkommen, and it is great to see you.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. It's a pleasure to join you. And as you reminded me in our chat just now, it's been a year since I've been in this format. I was there last year on the first day of the new Tagesspiegel, so a very memorable date for me. It's wonderful to be back.
Well, Anya, it's sort of funny because it's been almost exactly a year to the day. And so I thought that was very funny as I was preparing my notes for our conversation. Obviously, a lot has happened since then, and we'll get into that. But there are just a lot of topics to discuss today. And I thought in our conversation, we could start by looking a little bit more closely at the international arena, which is obviously the area that you cover on a day-to-day basis. But then there are a few domestic issues that I think would be really valuable for our viewers and our listeners to hear about. So let's start with relations with Turkey. Last week, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was in Berlin, and this was his first visit to Germany in 3 years. The visit came at a time when ties between Turkey and its NATO partners are strained. This trip had been planned well before the October 7th attack in Gaza, but particularly given that President Erdogan has been a very loud critic regarding Israel and has actually spoken in support of Hamas. It was a pretty controversial visit. And some of the tensions were actually on display at Friday's press conference with Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Can you talk a little bit about Erdogan's visit and sort of the reception that he got in Berlin?
Yeah. So, as you very rightly said, this visit was proposed by Chancellor Scholz after the re-election of Erdogan in May. And in the run-up to this visit now, there had been a big discussion in Germany about whether this should be canceled. And there were several voices that had asked for a cancellation. But I think it was right for the German government to still meet with Erdogan. So there were two separate meetings. President Steinmeier met with him and Chancellor Scholz, and it just speaks to the fact that even though Erdogan has shown very problematic rhetoric in the last few weeks, Turkey remains a crucial partner for Germany and the EU and NATO due to its geographic position and strategic position. And what we've seen has, in fact, been quite disappointing. Erdogan tried to present himself as a mediator after October 7th, but then realized he couldn't win anything, and also catering to his conservative Islamist audience in Turkey, he then veered to back Hamas, and it's really been firebrand rhetoric out of him. So that caused a big problem for the German government. And as you rightly said, the encounter was quite tense. I think you could say that Erdogan tried not to back down, but still sort of toned down some of his rhetoric. And as soon as he was back home, he called Steinmeier and Scholz crusaders and went back to his firebrand rhetoric. So while he still said controversial things while he was in Germany, and we could see that it was a little toned down, and he only went back to his firebrand rhetoric once he was back. And it's interesting that you mention NATO because, interestingly, Stoltenberg, the NATO General Secretary, said that for him, Hamas or Erdogan's support of Hamas or his rhetoric support of Hamas did not play a role for his NATO membership. And I think that really also shows the difference between NATO being mostly a strategic military union versus the EU,
Mhm.
where Turkey is still an official candidate. And the Turkish foreign minister only in August had said that he wished for Turkey to come on track with EU membership. But this is out of the question, and the Commission the EU Commission just presented its report on the candidate status and says that that Turkey has been moving away from the EU. So the EU is really a value-based community, and Turkey has shown that not only for the fact that Erdogan has been backing Hamas in his rhetoric, but also that democracy and the rule of law has been in decline in Turkey. They're not membership candidates anytime soon.
So let me maybe pick up on a couple of these threads that you've put out there. I guess one is Erdogan certainly, I think it's fair to say, stuck to his position regarding the attacks on Israel and his support for Hamas. He was, as you said, perhaps not quite as outspoken or as incendiary as he's sometimes been. Chancellor Scholz sort of used that as a way of saying, all the more reason for us to be in conversation with each other directly in these difficult times. I think that was one of the things that he said at the press conference. How useful do you think these bilateral discussions between Steinmeier on the one hand, Scholz on the other, with Erdogan were or can be? Do you think that there's actually a sort of sense of any sort of common purpose, or the two sides just still too far apart?
Well, I think there is actually a lot of value in staying in touch and talking to each other. And I think many things will have been said while no press, no audience was present. And I think it's important to stress the Western position on this issue, even though it probably won't sway Erdogan. But he's a crucial actor in this position. And so going forward in the Middle East, but also dealing with migratory flows, he will be an important partner. So I think isolation is not an option.
So the other thing is that, as you talked about, the Turkish president has obviously been supportive of Hamas, which has been designated as a terrorist organization by Germany, by the EU, by the United States. Instead, Erdogan has described them as liberators who are fighting for their land. And this is an especially sensitive issue in Germany, where the Turkish community is very large. And Erdogan's position has sort of fueled negative sentiments towards Israel within the Turkish community living in Germany. Can you talk about how this sort of visit played out in the Turkish community and in sort of regard to inter-German relations between the Turkish community and the German community?
Well, I think you have to see it against the backdrop of the past few weeks, and there. So we have on the one hand a strong community of Turkish origin, but also a strong community of Arab origin, Palestinians, Syrians, for example, and there has been quite vocal support of the Palestinian cause in German streets, and there has been a lot of controversy over this. The majority of Germans felt that on German streets there couldn't be any hostility towards Israel, any signs of anti-Semitism. So we saw a number of demonstrations that were banned. We saw slogans banned. For example, it's become declared illegal to say "from the river to the sea," and other steps that were taken to make sure that there is no anti-Semitism and no hostility against the state of Israel on German streets. So this is important to keep in mind. And then you also have to see that among the German, the Turkish community that lives in Germany, support for Erdogan has been surprisingly high. And this has caused a lot of frustration. We saw this in May, or in the run-up to the election, that the share of Erdogan supporters among those who lived in Germany but could still vote in Turkey was tremendous. And so people were frustrated over the fact that those Turkish citizens enjoyed the liberties of living in Germany, but then supported an autocrat back home. And so this sort of tied into what you just said, and that there are many different political tendencies tied together in this.
So let's maybe pivot a little bit and talk a little bit more about the reaction in Germany to what's going on in Gaza right now. Obviously, over the last few weeks, we've seen some very dramatic scenes playing out on the streets. Some have been violent. There have been all sorts of different protests, both pro-Palestinian but also pro-Israeli protests. There has been a noted uptick in anti-Semitism with a couple instances of Molotov cocktails being thrown at synagogues and Stars of David being painted on the homes or businesses of Jewish people. At least from far away, it seems as if things have maybe calmed down a little bit. But what's your sense on how this response is being internalized in Germany on the streets among the public at this point?
Well, the situation on the streets has definitely calmed down, but you can still feel how much emotion this causes on all sides. And as of course, this as a German, this extremely pains me to see the rise in anti-Semitism, the hostility against Jewish people in Germany. We swore that this would never again happen in Germany. And there has been a lot of outpour of solidarity. The Brandenburg Gate was shown and covered with the flag of Israel. And so there were a positive signs showing a clear no against anti-Semitism. But of course, we have to take the uptick in hostilities and anti-Semitic rhetoric very seriously. And on the other hand, we also have to see what can be done to deal with a migrant community that shows this potential frustration. I think we've seen this not only in Germany, but throughout other countries. We've seen it in Britain, in Canada, in the US, and in France. So I think this is also a time where we need to look at mistakes that were done when it comes to education, social policies towards migrant communities that live in our countries.
Thank you, Anja. I'm just looking at a question that came in from one of our viewers, who's curious whether the unity of the Turkish community living in Germany has been strong, or if there have been different interests or different factions within the Turkish community that can be seen and that need to be taken into consideration as well.
Oh, definitely. You can see a lot of very different factions. You can see the descendants, for example, of those who came in the 50s, who were the first Gastarbeiter, as we then call them, who came from rural Turkey, and some of them managed to integrate quite well, despite the difficulties that German policies created back then. So the original policy was to have guest workers, as they were then called, come to Germany, work here, but sort of live in isolated communities, because the aim back then was not to integrate them, but to have them work here and then they would go back home. So back then, integration was never part of the policy. So some of them stayed in extremely isolated communities, only learned German rudimentarily, never sort of adopted the German way of life. And you can sometimes see how this pursued during the following generations. And then you have a Turkish elite that migrated to Germany, often highly educated people who came here to study German, to work in Germany in educated jobs. And so they're usually very progressive, very liberal. And then you have a community of those who are exiles, who left Turkey for political reasons. And it's actually quite interesting. We have a journalist, Can Dündar. He's in exile because the Erdogan government pursued him in Turkey. He could no longer live there. And so he's quite famous, and he has to have bodyguards, which are actually given to him by the German government because they want to make sure that he's not attacked. But there have been numerous attempts to attack him because parts of the German community, of the Turkish community in Germany, see him as a threat to the Erdogan regime, and therefore try to attack him. So there are hostilities within the Turkish community, even here in Germany.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there really are divisions within society, and it's important in the Turkish society in Germany, and it's important not to look at it as just one group. Since we're talking about the conflict in Gaza, one of our viewers just submitted a question asking why the German government does not call for a ceasefire in Gaza, as some other governments have.
Well, the German government tries to be very moderate in its position there, due to the historic obligation that it feels toward the state of Israel. So the German government has chosen to remain more neutral in this field.
Thank you. Thanks. Let's move on to some other topics, because there has been a lot going on. Erdogan's visit to Germany wasn't the only big meeting that took place last week. Of course, many of our viewers and listeners followed the meeting between President Biden and President Xi, and I'm curious how closely this meeting was followed in Berlin, and whether there are any takeaways from Germany as far as the relationship between the U.S. and China is concerned.
Well, I think China and how to deal with China plays an enormous role for us here in Germany. And there has been a great discussion about decoupling. Should we decouple? How far should decoupling go? Especially against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine. There's been a lot of critical assessment of economic ties to China and possible dependencies. So I think there was a big relief that this meeting happened, and it was seen as important that Biden and Xi talk, and the previous attempts to meet and the failure then was seen with concern, because I think it's general felt that dialogue is always critical, even if there are a few joint positions. And I think one takeaway was the importance of regulating AI. That's been quite a big topic here, and the EU has been working on regulation. And a number of experts have been discussing the creation of a panel, as it's been suggested, an intergovernmental panel. So I think there was a relief that on this top level between Biden and Xi, this was given a lot of attention, and hopefully we'll see progress on that front.
So there also over the last few years has been sort of some concern in Berlin of being caught in the middle between China and the US, and really Germany's desire to sort of avoid being caught in the middle. Of course, last summer, or this past summer, Berlin came out with its new China strategy on the heels of the national security strategy, where it really tries to walk a fine line. And it seems as if there's a distinct sort of government position of trying to not be too dependent on China, but lots of questions about whether the German economy, whether German business will go in the same direction and follow that cue. How is that sort of playing out right now? Are there distinctive positions between the business community and the government when it comes to relations with China?
I would say yes, because but you can't, of course, speak for the entire business communities. It's very dependent on which company you look at. But there are a number of big companies that have immensely invested in China and in increasing their production facilities in China in the past years. So, of course, for them, it has tremendous economic repercussions if they were to withdraw from China. So it's understandable that this is not a short-term process and that there is some resistance. But I think, especially against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, there has been increased awareness that these business relationships need to be very critically assessed, and that a rise in conflict, for example, could create a situation where this might have to lead to a very quick reversal. So whereas there is still quite a lot of resistance among some of the business community as to completely questioning their investments in China, I think there is a new awareness.
Mm-hmm. So Anja, it's interesting. Here we are, more than 20 minutes into our conversation, and we haven't even touched on Ukraine. When we talked a year ago, I think we spent the entire Kaffeepause talking about the situation in Ukraine. And so, maybe I know the answer to this question as a result, but I'm wondering to what degree Ukraine is still a important topic in Germany, or whether it is really being overshadowed by other news, and whether it's sort of being pushed to the back burner and not front and center for the media, but also for a lot of people.
Well, interestingly, you have to look at it in two ways. If you are looking at it in the way, is it overshadowed as news? Then yes. In the past few weeks, since October 7th, Ukraine has almost vanished from the front pages, and because the focus has been so much on the Middle East. But on the other hand, you see that the political steps haven't suffered from this, because the EU Commission convened on presenting their reports, and Ursula von der Leyen was in Kiev just before that, and gave great praise to Ukraine for its efforts in implementing reform steps, even under the very heavy burden of fighting a war against Russia. And so you can see that these steps move forward. And for me, it's been very interesting in following the debates on budget, because, of course, in the US, you have a big debate about whether to continue financial and military support for Ukraine. And I thought it was very interesting that in the Republican Party, there were voices sort of putting the one against the other and saying we should support Israel and not Ukraine. And interestingly, this debate didn't play out in Europe. There was no discussion about whether we should do one or the other. And the German parliament just announced plans that it wants to invest twice as much money in the next budget. So it's 8 billion euros earmarked for 2024 to aid Ukraine, because it's really seen as a top priority that Ukraine receive all we can muster to win this war against Russia.
And so related to that, and in light of what you were just saying about Ursula von der Leyen's recent trip and some of her public comments, it seems as if there's a renewed discussion or debate about EU enlargement. I mean, obviously, Ukraine is hoping to enter the European Union. There are a number of things that need a certain amount of homework that has to be done on the Ukrainian side. But there also needs to be a political willingness on the rest of Europe to assume new members into this club. Can you talk a little bit about the prospects of EU enlargement?
So we have the difficult situation that, of course, there's a lot of political will in sending positive signals to Ukraine. And I think politically, it's an important signal, but I'd also warn against raising false hopes, because we have countries that have been waiting, like North Macedonia, for 17 years now to join the European Union. And so we need to make sure that before the pool becomes too large, and these countries are also being fairly dealt with. And I think for Ukraine, while a positive signal, you belong in Europe, is crucial at this point, we also shouldn't cause a distraction for Kiev to in order to ensure that they can focus on the Russian aggression and win this war. So the Commission, headed by Ursula von der Leyen, has recommended to the European Council, which will convene in December, to start formal negotiations about EU accession for Ukraine. At the moment, it looks like Hungary might oppose this, which is also causing quite a controversy, of course, in Europe. But we could well see Ukraine starting formal negotiations, even now under the conditions of war. But as we have discussed with NATO, for example, the EU treaty has a similar clause, an obligation to assistance. So were Ukraine to become a member, even while the war was still going on, we would have the same obligation to assist as we would have under the NATO treaty. So this is something that, of course, would have to be discussed at length.
I mean, given your role as focusing on international affairs at the Tagesspiegel, I mean, what do you think some of the broader repercussions could be of really opening these formal talks with Ukraine and concerning Ukrainian accession to the EU? Don't you think that could even exacerbate the situation with Russia and with Putin?
My top concern wouldn't be Putin or Russia. I think on that, in that regard, I would even say it's important to send a signal that Ukraine belongs in Europe and not in Russia. So I think that's an important message when it comes to the Eastern Front. But I think with regards to the community as such, with regard to the European Union, there is so much that needs to happen in order to be able to take in more candidates, Ukraine and others. There needs to be reform. Now the EU 27 is already facing obstacles when it comes to consensus on the most crucial issues, for example, on the size of the European Parliament, also on agricultural policy and financial support for member countries. So there are many issues of internal reform that need to happen before the EU can take in a number of new members. And for example, when you look at the size of the Ukrainian agricultural sector, that will have a huge impact on agricultural policy within the European Union. So there are a lot of questions that need to be extensively tackled.
Mm-hmm. So Anja, I'd like to maybe switch to sort of some domestic issues. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of domestic topics to talk about right now. But maybe one sort of stepping stone to that could be to talk a little bit about migration policy at the moment, because obviously that's been in the headlines a lot. We can't really talk about the impact of the war in Ukraine without talking about migration and sort of the burden that Germany has seen through the many people from Ukraine who have come to Germany. But obviously, that's not the only sort of threat or the only challenge. We're seeing an influx of migration now as well because of the uncertainty and conflict in the Middle East. And one of our viewers is curious as to how sort of migration policy and specifically labor policy might change as a result of the current conflict.
Well, as a result of the current conflict in the Middle East?
Yes.
Well, I don't think that will have an immediate impact because Germany has seen high numbers of refugees coming through various routes, and it's been a controversial issue for many, many years. And there's been recently the suggestion to sort of create a limit of intake per year, sort of a ceiling to the numbers of refugees that Germany would take in, or to also modify our asylum legislation, which has been met with quite a controversial response and has also caused quite some trouble within the Green Party and within the Social Democratic Party, which are on the one hand governing and need to respond to the problems at hand, but which also have a long tradition in leftist positions and a humanitarian approach. So this has been politically quite a hot topic. And then, of course, the EU is moving towards creating a coherent legislation, which then even brings in more actors to a difficult problem. In Germany, I think one of the problems that we really need to address is to enable asylum seekers and migrants to Germany to move into the labor market more quickly. Because at the moment, it takes an immense time where people who come to Germany and whose status is not cleared, who can't basically do anything. They have to wait around, which is psychologically problematic and also doesn't help us with our labor shortage, which we face both in the qualified and unqualified labor market. So I think there are some low-hanging fruit, but there are a number of bureaucratic obstacles that need to be overcome in order to deal with this issue. But I'm hopeful that there will be some regulation on the horizon.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anja, I might have buried the lead because I think the really big story that I've seen in a lot of the German press this morning has been the fact that last week Germany's constitutional court ruled that the government cannot sort of repurpose the 60 billion euros that are left over from a COVID emergency fund to finance the coalition's climate agenda. And this has really created a number of different reverberations, and there are at least two levels to talk about when it comes to this. I guess at the top level, I'd be curious, and one of our viewers is very curious to know how the German public is reacting to this development, which could both hurt growth, but also Germany's environmental ambitions. And then maybe we can, in a sort of second round, get into some of the sort of tensions within the governing coalition, right? So the top level is, what's been the reaction to this news that the government cannot use this funding to finance the climate agenda?
Well, I would say that the public reaction has probably been something between shock and confusion, because shock because it's 60 billion euros. That's a lot of money. So every citizen is concerned what might happen now. Will something that is financed by public money now be scrapped? And but on the other hand, it's a very technical process, so it's very difficult to understand what actually happened there. That repurposing of this sum from the COVID recovery fund to climate funding happened, and that it came from the Constitutional Court, which declared it unconstitutional, but it's money that had already been assigned. So it's for the general citizen, it's extremely hard. Even for us, it's hard to understand what it actually technically means. And so this money has might also have quite an impact on the economy, because it had a lot of subsidies and support for SMEs, for example, in order to adapt to more climate-friendly technologies, or to support technological innovation and strengthening of climate-friendly technologies. So there has already been a concern voiced by German economists that this might lead Germany into a severe recession. So I think at the moment we're still in the beginning of realizing what this will mean, and of course the government has been scrambling to make sure, first of all, to calm everyone, but also to find adequate responses to address the shortage that we will have now in the climate and energy financing.
I mean, I think one person that is definitely worth mentioning here is Robert Habeck, the Vice Chancellor and Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate issues, who even before the Constitutional Court passed its judgment had said publicly that if the Constitutional Court strikes this down, it could mean great difficulties for the German economy and for some of the goals that Germany has when it comes to its environmental ambitions. And so since the news has come out that the court declared this to be unconstitutional, Habeck has said that this could be very challenging for the German economy moving forward. How nervous are politicians and the business community and Germans at large about the repercussions of this?
Well, I think there is definitely some tension because it's still quite new, and of course the solutions aren't readily available. So at the moment, you can see a lot of scrambling as to how this might be dealt with. And it puts Robert Habeck in a quite difficult position also politically, because of course this is his main portfolio. And as you might recall, he attempted a heating reform, which ended quite badly, which gave him a big stain and publicly, because people felt sort of overwhelmed, not their issues with heating and heating regulation not being taken into account. So I think this will prove another a quite big obstacle for him politically.
I mean, many of our viewers and listeners will know that Germany has something called a debt brake, which is a balanced budget rule that really puts a very strict limit on deficit spending. And so I think that's really kind of what's at issue here with this 60 billion. But this situation has really led to tremendous tension between the Greens, Robert Habeck's party, and the Free Democrats, Christian Lindner's party. And Christian Lindner, of course, is the finance minister. One of our viewers and I as well are very interested in hearing your sense of whether this current situation can lead to even further tensions or divisions within the governing coalition as a result of this.
Yeah, I definitely think so, that this will increase tensions even further among the coalition, because of course the Green Party for them it's a crucial initiative, the climate and energy funding, whereas Christian Lindner as the Minister of Finance has to keep the budget in check. So I think we see in a coalition that's already been undergoing quite a lot of tensions, we see now a potential dose of dynamite. And there were some that even after, right after the Constitutional Court handed down its judgment, said this will blow the coalition apart. I think that there is a lot of political will among the three parties to stay in power, to stay together as a coalition. So I think they will put everything they have in finding a solution. And there are some discussions, for example, about declaring an emergency to extend the emergency regulation that lets the German government pass the debt brake, as you already mentioned. So I think there might be solutions in this direction, but at the moment we can't say which way they're headed.
So this is obviously a story to watch closely, and one that, I mean, you talked about a stick of dynamite. I mean, one that really has the potential to explode the coalition. It's probably too early to be able to say whether or not the coalition will hold, but this is definitely something worth watching. Something else in German politics right now that I think is worth watching is what's going on the far left of the political spectrum. And I think that there are sort of two interesting stories there. One is what's going on with the left party itself, which I guess on the 6th of December, the left party has said it will dissolve its faction in the Bundestag. And at the same time, we're seeing a new political initiative around Sarah Wagenknecht, who, of course, formerly was a member of the Left Party. Over the weekend, there was reporting about a new opinion poll from the Institute Kantar, which used to be MNID, that basically gave the Left Party a little bit of a sort of sense of safety, because some 15% of voters said that they would support the Left Party, as opposed to 12% that would support the Sarah Wagenknecht new party. But can you talk a little bit about what's going on at the political left, and what sort of a threat the Sarah Wagenknecht party might pose?
Yeah, so Sarah Wagenknecht is quite a political figure in Germany. You could easily say that she's the most popular left-wing politician, and she felt that the left party had poorly performed in the last few years, and that many people no longer felt represented by any party. So she felt that there needs to be a party, a political force that opposes the current coalition government, and that's why she's moving to found this new party. At the moment, she's only founded an association, the BSW, and she describes it as left-wing conservative, and I think and she's held some quite controversial positions. She's opposed support for Ukraine. She's suggested that Germany could leave NATO. She's accused NATO of being partially responsible for the war in Ukraine. So she's definitely not a majority candidate in Germany. But on the fringe, she's quite a popular figure, and she's a talented public speaker, so a true demagogue. So I think the founding of her party, first of all, as you rightly said, it led to the dissolution, or it will lead to the dissolution as of December 6th of the left-wing party group in the German parliament, because they were no longer have a sufficient number of members. 10 total, including her, will leave with her and have already left the party. And so I think we'll see a splintering. And I think it's there's a saying that the extremes touch, and I think in this case, we will see the AfD, Sarah Wagenknecht's party, and the left party taking shares from each other, because I think sort of the fringe, be it on the left or be it on the right, there tends to be an overlap in their positions. So I think we'll see a splintering of the extremes.
So as we come to a close, let me maybe ask you the question that I often use as my opening question at the Kaffeepause, which is, against this backdrop that we've been talking about, of tremendous uncertainty and volatility on the international stage, but also in German domestic politics, what's the mood like in Germany right now, as you sort of try to gauge how the public is looking at all of these developments?
Well, I would say Germans tend to be half empty people anyway, so we're never particularly outrageously cheerful. But at the moment, I would say that the mood is quite depressed because people feel overwhelmed by the amount of crises that they perceive. Political developments are extremely complicated and hard to understand for many people. And as you see in the US, there is also a decline in reading reliable media. People have trended in the past few decades to other sources of information and fall more easily prey to unreliable, to false information. And I think with the war in the Middle East, which is sort of a war of narratives, a war of pictures as well, we've seen how easy it's become to manipulate information, to manipulate pictures, to create false images through AI. So I think this causes people, be it in Germany or be it in other places, to be extremely insecure. What are sources that I can really trust with when it comes to information? What is true? What can I still believe? So I think in Germany, as in many other places, we see this increase in insecurity. And I think this calls upon us as media in a new, very strong way to really provide accountable journalism, to make sure to explain developments, to break down developments and make sure that we're a reliable, understandable source of information to our citizens.
Well, Anja, herzlichen Dank. Thank you so much for this wide-ranging conversation today. I hope we don't have to wait another year to have you back as a guest for the Kaffeepause. But this has been a tremendously insightful discussion. So many, many thanks to you in Berlin for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Steve. It was my pleasure.